Gun violence, a lack of diversity at the White House, a dysfunctional Congress, and also a pastor who was supposed to give the benediction of the inauguration pulls out. All of that on the agenda for our roundtable today. I'm joined by Sophia Nelson, author and Essence magazine contributor, Armstrong Williams, host of The Right Side, and Dedrick Muhammad, senior director of the economic department for the NAACP. All right, folks, welcome to Washington Watch. Let's jump right into it. Vice President Joe Biden this week led these various meetings dealing with gun control, brought in video gaming companies, brought in NRA, brought in other folks involved in this conversation. He says on Tuesday he would give his recommendations to President Obama. Do you believe we are going to see something real and tangible to deal with gun control in this country, to deal with gun violence in this country?
Well, you know, listen, there's no amount of legislation that you can pass to stop the kind of violence that we're seeing today. There's just too many criminals. There are too many people that have guns. Both sides must realize they've got to compromise something, especially the background check is something that they can compromise. But if President Obama actually thinks that he's going to reduce the roles of guns and of the Second Amendment in this country, he's got to be kidding. He'd create a storm. And listen, many people like myself, and this is not a black and white issue. There are many Americans who, deep in the South, we grew up with guns. That is our culture. We're trained. We're responsible. We protect ourselves. We never talk about how often guns save lives because you have them in the homes. There's another debate that we haven't even had yet.
But Roland, let me say this. I slightly disagree with Armstrong. Now, look, you know I'm an NRA person. I own guns.
What you wearing? You shot and killed and skinned it.
I live in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and so I'm a gun person. But let me say this. I do think we can compromise. I think, for example, the clips. 30 rounds in a clip, we can compromise on that. I don't see why anybody needs that. I have rounds for my shotgun and stuff like that, but I don't need 30 rounds in my clip. Right. So there are things that we know that in the horrible tragedy in Newtown, Connecticut, that had this very disturbed, angry, evil young man not had the amount of rounds that he had in the guns that he had, probably more of those babies would have survived. Some of the children were riddled with bullets, saying as much as 10, 11 rounds in their little bodies. That's horrible.
And I just want to argue, there is a history of good gun legislation helping to lessen gun violence. I think people point to Australia and the massive change they had after a massive gun shooting and the gun change laws that have brought down gun deaths. And that in that country, they're also very gun-loving culture. So I do think it is possible that gun legislation can help. But what I'm concerned about is the gun legislations, I think, will be primarily focused around incidents like in Newton, but not focused on the daily gun violence that kills so many people.
And that's the thing that I've written this, we've discussed it on this show, and we've tried to have a different conversation. I believe having a gun control conversation is narrow. I believe having a gun violence conversation is totally different. Because when you look at stand your ground laws in Florida, the guy who says turn your music down and then the guys don't do it, they start cussing each other out, he gets his gun, he fires 8 shots into SUV, kills a young brother. We had his parents here on the show. You talk about Trayvon Martin. I'm talking about the same thing, inner city Chicago. There's in this country we have a problem with gun violence. It is a cultural problem we have, and for some reason we only want to talk about gun control but not deal with the mindset of Americans.
I want to reiterate your point, because if you get caught up in talking about assault weapons don't do nearly the damage as handguns.
Right.
I mean, it's about, you're right. We have a problem with violent gun owners, violence that we don't address.
Well, the culture's angry, and we're on a much shorter fuse, and you're seeing more and more incidences of these lone gunmen. They always fit a similar profile, which I think is interesting that we don't talk about. But
white males?
Yes,
white males.
But I'm saying, but if you go to inner cities like Chicago's had this epidemic of violence, right? And it's been, well, but I'm talking about recently. I'm talking about it's been in the news more because we focus on these tragedies when they happen in suburban areas of wealth or whatever, but we don't care about seemingly the young black people that die every day in inner cities in our country. So what I'm saying is there's a culture of violence beyond just guns, whether it's stabbing, baseball bats, whatever we're doing. Our words are angry.
The mistake that I think that also is happening in this town, on Capitol Hill, and in the White House, is that while you're talking about gun control, you better also be having a real conversation about mental illness in this country. Because when there are budget cuts on the local, on the city, county, state, federal level, what's one of the first areas that gets cut? Mental illness, and that's also a big problem we have in America.
Well, also poverty, unemployment, because again, the mental health issue is a lot for these kind of lone gunman shootings. But again, I think the concentrated ghettos of mass poverty, disenfranchisement is also.
No, but even in those places, because part of the deal, we've had Dr. Steve Perry on the show and others, that part of the issue that you have with these cats you talk about a short fuse is because folks have anger issues. Absolutely. They are walking around upset, and then what happens is the gun is what's giving them power, because logic says if I don't have a gun, okay, I'm going to think my way out of this situation, but because I got my gun, I'm going to shoot my way out.
What about the video games?
Well, that's part of the it's still part of the deal. Hold tight 1 second. I'm going to a break. Got to pay some bills, and then Sophia's going to tell us in the break how she shot and killed that animal she went. Back in Washington, watching the moment.